very fine. I am very excited today, because I get to visually see my friend Adam Sklute, who has been a very, very important part of my life. And I've admired him since he was a dancer at the Joffrey and then became associate director. I was bereft when he accepted a position in Salt Lake City as artistic director of Ballet West. But as Joseph pointed out, the authentic Joffrey Ballet, as we all knew it, took root in Salt Lake City, and the programs have been utterly brilliant and exciting. So that has been joyous. One of the things that I admire about Adam is his integrity and his authenticity. And when everybody was jumping on the bandwagon for racial equality and the hypocrisy with all of the letters and organizations saying, we're really in favor, we back, and I'm thinking, I wonder. But Adam has been doing that for so many years. He's been making ballets relevant years before this hypocrisy. And I'm sorry, I prefer authenticity. He celebrates cultures rather than using stereotypes in the ballets. And this has made for some interesting, what word should I use? Adjustments, rethinking.
Reevaluating even. Yeah.
All right, because is a performance art set in stone, or is there room to take a look at it and release or revision what has been stereotypical behavior, choreography? So Adam, please.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And it's really nice to be here with everybody. I was mentioning earlier while we were getting on that this is the first opportunity I've had to do any kind of presentational speaking in months and months and months, just based on where we all are in the world. But yeah, definitely this time with everything that has come up since all of the protests and discussions revolving around racial equity and racial representation has become huge in the ballet world as well. And it is something that we're discussing, all artistic directors. I'm on a weekly forum with artistic directors from around the country, and we're really discussing how we reevaluate classical ballet. I think classical ballet is fascinating when we look at the way we represent race in particular. It is, I think, unique in all the performing arts, and it is unique in all the arts with this. And what do we do with it? How do we bring it forward while still honoring the history that it's built on? You know, the static art forms, painting and photography, sculpture, and even film in that matter, because that is what it is a representation and a time capsule of when it was presented. But the performing arts, to what Barbara had said, are those, and do they need to be, this kind of frozen representation from the past? You know, certainly in opera, we have the voices and we have the libretto and such, the story that's going on. But opera for many years has created a very multiracial presentation. In fact, much longer than ballet has. In theater, we see that more and more when we take the script and we tell the story, but perhaps in different ways that are more inclusive of different cultures. In classical ballet, We find that so much of the actual ballets, though, are built on a combination of not just the music and the dancing, the choreography, but also the sets and the world that it is set in. We can change the world, but so much of it is still designed to represent a different culture. It's also interesting to note that classical ballet, born out of the imperial courts of Europe, is a Eurocentric art form at its core. That's not a bad thing. I have people who are arguing we should do away with that whole way of looking at the art form. And I disagree with that because it is, but personally I believe it is a Eurocentric art form. When we go into new stories and new ballets, those can certainly, using old classical ballet technique and dancing, represent new stories from around the world. But I do still believe that there is a place for our classic art forms. And for today, I wanted to talk through a couple of different pieces that I've been working on with specifically dealing with these. And it's about Asian representation, particularly Chinese representation in classical ballet. Saying that classical ballet is Eurocentric, many of the big classics that we know tell a story, and as part of the presentation of that story, there is also then a journey or a showcase of dances from around the world. These start, you see these in the big classics, from Swan Lake to the Sleeping Beauty to the Nutcracker, that old warhorse that we all know, as a celebration of this good deed that little Clara has done. She is honored by dances from around the world. Well, we at Ballet West have a wonderful opportunity, a unique distinction of having the oldest full production of the Nutcracker in America. Our founder, Willem Christensen, founded the first ballet company in America, San Francisco Ballet, and he created the first full version. Prior to that, there had been only small touring versions or the Nutcracker suite, sort of excerpted version. His version in 1944 was the first full version. We have performed it here in a solid, unbroken run since 1953. So it is also the longest running Nutcracker in America and possibly even the world. When I arrived at Ballet West in 2007, I had come from the Joffrey, and I had grown up on Robert Joffrey's production of the Nutcracker. In fact, I was part of the creation of that version. Based on an old Ballet Russe version, it was sort of part of my heart and soul, and I didn't think I was going to like any other Nutcracker ever. But pleasantly surprised to find that I adored Ballet West's Nutcracker, this first Nutcracker in America. But there were some problems with it as I saw it. And my very first viewing of the Chinese dance made me question, is this really how we want to represent Chinese culture? My feeling was that what I was looking at was more of a mockery than a celebration. And I thought, how do we manage that? How do we work with this? How do we still honor Willem Christensen's choreography, honor the history of a ballet like the Nutcracker, and yet still make it more palatable to a 21st century audience? I'm going to break really quickly, and hopefully I won't have too many technical difficulties, but I want to show you a clip from 1975 of the Chinese.
Adam, how do we get you full screen or somebody else? We're still...
What are you seeing right now from me?
Everybody.
So if I go, hold on, I think if I go there.
I'm seeing just Adam.
Do pin video.
What I was going to do is, it's okay right now to see everybody, and then I think when I put on the video, when I share screen, you're only going to see that. Let's test that real quickly. This is, I'm just going to first make sure I have it.
I just want to say that if you go into the upper corner where it says gallery view in the upper right hand corner, Barbara, do you see?
Yeah, but mine isn't saying that. It says full
On
screen
her laptop, I think. Or she's on her.
review.
There's there should be three, maybe you have a 3-dot version. But anyway, you can do it so you just have speaker view and that can be very small.
Okay, I've got you. So now we'll find Adam who needs to talk.
So if I'm
Adam.
speaking, do you see me now?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So now let's see if we see this. You may for a second see a whole thing and then I'll make it full screen. So I'm now going to share screen. Do you see
Yes.
this?
Yes.
And now do we see the entire screen?
No, we still see you, but we see the clip.
Hold on. You see
It's
the,
okay. This works.
let's see.
I have to say, I see the entire screen. I don't see anybody but the dancers.
Well, good.
Me too.
But can everybody see the dancers in one form or another?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
This is a clip from 1975 of Willem Christensen's Chinese dance from the Nutcracker. And I'm just going to play it real quick. Let's see. Can you hear it?
Yes.
It will get less blurry. I want you to know that this young man is a very blonde young man from Salt Lake City, Utah, who is dancing the Chinese dancer. They're all wearing black wigs. He obviously, this big mustache. The ladies are bobbing their head incessantly. So I'm going to, there. Now, I think in 1944, that may have been considered a celebration of Chinese culture. But I didn't think in 2007 that that was as much of a celebration. And I, as I said, felt it was a little bit more of a mockery. So I actually did some research and went to Willem Christensen's brother's Nutcracker. When the Christensen brothers are a famous family who grew up on the West Coast, went to New York to study under George Balanchine in New York City, and then joined a vaudeville. The two of them created a vaudeville team with their wives, traveled across the country in vaudeville until, as I said, Willem Christensen founded the San Francisco Ballet. That Nutcracker he created in 1944. In 1953, he moved back to Utah, which is where they were from. Interesting story. He moved to Utah because to found the first fully accredited ballet department in any university in the world, and that's at the University of Utah. Before that, ballet was part of the physical education department, and so this became the first full exclusively ballet department. He did it because his wife at the time in 1953 had contracted polio. And as an artistic director of a ballet company, he did not receive health benefits, medical benefits, but he would as a professor at a university. So he founded this ballet department. When he left San Francisco, his brother Lou, who took over the San Francisco Ballet, and Lou did his own version of the Nutcracker. His version of the Nutcracker came out in 1956, and in 1969 he redid the Chinese dance as well to sort of follow the how should I say, Chinese New Year's that he was seeing in San Francisco. So I went to the Christensen family, asked if they would allow me to interpolate Lou Christensen's version of the Chinese dance alone into Willem Christensen's full production of the Nutcracker. I felt like it was, as I said, more of a celebration. And they agreed, and we modified it even more to make the Chinese, it's a warrior fighting a Chinese dragon, one of those Chinese street dragons. And we modified it even more to make the Chinese street dragon even bigger. Now, we see this happening a lot in a lot of different nutcrackers now, the whole Chinese street dragon thing. But this was actually Lou Christensen's concept, and he did it first. So I'm going to put that one on, and you can see it as well, because it is wildly different. This is from the production that we premiered in 2017, and Barbara was one of the wonderful people who helped make our new production possible. Indeed, you may have seen, I think she sent out a picture of her Mouse King. That, thanks to Barbara, we have a spectacular Mouse King.
But Adam wouldn't let me on stage. But I will say, when the curtain came down in DC, because I took the girls for a weekend to see Nutcracker, and little Noah, curtain comes down and she looks at her mommy and says, "That was amazing." So the youngest critic.
Oh, well, let's see. Can we see this now?
Yep.
Okay, so if we see that, let's see if we can try this one. We see this use of a Chinese dragon a lot now, as I was saying. This became a very popular addition to the Nutcracker as the years go on, but Lou's version from 1967 is really the first one that I know of recorded that actually used this. Instead of creating a sort of Chinese dancer with a big mustache and a core of women sort of spinning parasols and bobbing their heads in a sort of mocking way, I felt like this actually showed someone of power, of strength, and a sort of joyous representation of Chinese culture. And so that is our new Nutcracker. That is our new Chinese dance from that. I'm going to switch really quickly, because in 2018, when we returned to the Kennedy Center with it for the third time, NPR did a short special on this whole thing. And what I think is the most interesting about the special is our discussion on the makeup. One of the big things that we didn't do when we first changed to this dance was address how we presented the artist facially. And this was another interesting piece about what we're talking about, is when we're presenting a Chinese dance, is it for us to turn a person of another race or culture into someone Chinese? Are we trying to make someone look Chinese? What is the difference of doing that and doing blackface, for that matter? And that was a big question that we started asking, because this type of these sort of long mustaches and slanty eyes and all of these things that they're trying to do to make a Caucasian in particular, or anybody, look Asian is no different than blackface. But it has been accepted up until just a couple of years ago, and in some dance productions still accepted. So it talks about what we did a little differently. This too is not much longer than what we did. So I'm going to put it on and we can get a chance to watch this. This is from, let's see, share screen. There. Can you all see that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is from other sections, but so, New York City Ballet's 1954 Nutcracker. And then two friends of mine that I'll speak about later, Georgita Pazaquin and Phil Chan.
My name is Adam Sklute,
I am the Artistic Director of Ballet West in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we are here at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., performing our production of Willem Christensen's The Nutcracker. The whole part of Act 2 in The Nutcracker is a journey from one culture to another. You have a Spanish dance. You have an Arabian dance, as they called it back then. You have a Chinese dance. The version was full of spinning parasols, shuffling feet, bobbing heads, pointy hats, every caricature imaginable.
There's one point where I think the girls are sitting down and their legs are out, and the guy has a fan and he's jumping over their legs, and he does like a few toe touches. This one is quite different. You have a Chinese warrior stick, and you actually go up on the stick, and the legs go over. You're essentially doing a cartwheel.
The original version had been created in 1944 by Willem Christensen, one of the Christensen brothers. He had founded the San Francisco Ballet, and then he moved back to Utah, where the Christensen brothers were born, to found Ballet West. His brother Lou took over the San Francisco Ballet, and Lou created his own version of the Nutcracker. And the Chinese dance that he created for it was very much based on the Chinese New Year's that he saw in San Francisco's Chinatown. So I went to the Christensen family and asked if I could interpolate Lou Christensen's version of the Chinese dance into Willem Christensen's overall production of the Nutcracker.
Right. So we start with a really thick, heavy bass.
At first,
Which is
we had the warrior dressed in a sort of different fashion, and his makeup still remained makeup that was trying to create a non-Asian into an Asian, shall we say, you know, with a long mustache, what we call from the movies a Fu Manchu mustache, and eye makeup to create more Asian eyes. We worked hard to change that. Last year, we went into a big effort of looking at different masks from the Peking opera, masks of great warriors that in the opera they would present a look of a great warrior. And I loved this idea.
So in a lot of the designs, this chin area was left open or neutral toned. And so it still allows for us to say we're not hiding this dancer away. You know, we're honoring it with this makeup, but like the person is still underneath it. And I think that's really cool. So to now be in a place where we're honoring a culture instead of trying to transform somebody's ethnicity, I think is a really powerful step forward as a company and hopefully as an art form. Because while ballet is steeped in history, I love that we're still moving that forward, honoring the past and moving forward, you know, honoring a culture instead of misrepresenting someone's, you know, heritage.
So now we could put anyone into that makeup, and hopefully when they're doing the character of the Chinese warrior, that they are able to present this great, strong, powerful, elegant representation of Chinese culture, no matter what background they come from.
I feel like we found a nice balance of something that honors a culture.
So there we go. So it was an interesting project. The fellow that was talking is our wig and makeup master, Yancey Quick, and I worked very closely with him to do that. This was just one example of how we've been moving forward. I think we look a lot at people's ethnicities and how we present them on the stage. We've done work that I'm not going to go into too long, but also about our Black dancers, and going down right now to talking about how they wear their hair on stage, how what color their tights should be, you know, which is issues that we don't necessarily as Caucasians think about so much. I, as a Caucasian, don't think about so much, but things that are very powerful and profound for people of color. Because again, I heard one woman once speak about having to wear pink tights in a classical ballet company. And she said, it's like looking down and not seeing my own legs. You know, I'm seeing someone else's legs while I'm dancing. And so, it's interesting because one of the things that I realized, even though I'd been working on these different ideas and about racial representation for years, my entire professional career, really, indeed, and I think a lot of my own focus on it as an artistic director I would say comes from working under Robert Joffrey. Mr. Joffrey was very big on that. In fact, he very early on was a pioneer in the way that he presented artists on stage and their uniqueness. And I think that was the big thing for me, is trying to really present their uniqueness. But these ideas of tights, I mean, that was shocking to me. Another thing that came up just recently, because we've gone into these conversations and I've been speaking with my dancers, a young corps de ballet dancer, a young woman said to me, a woman of color, you know, we recently were on tour in Minneapolis. It was actually the last engagement we did before we closed our doors. So it was the end of February. And she was in all three ballets, in the corps de ballet of all three ballets. And she said, you know, I was so excited and so honored to be in all three ballets, but you had asked that all of the women wear a low bun for the first ballet, that they wear a high bun for the second ballet, and that the final ballet be in a French twist. It was Balanchine's Jewels we were doing. And she said, so at a 15-minute intermission, I would watch my Caucasian, Asian, Latina, friends and colleagues take out pins, shake out their hair, and put up their hair. And she had to say to me, I couldn't do that with my hair. I have to say, that was mind-blowing to me. I meant no malice asking them to change their hair from one ballet to the next. It certainly wasn't intended to create a lack of equity, to create inequity between them. But here I had done that because she said I simply could not, in 15 minutes, change my hair that way. And I'm new in the company, and I didn't want to come up to you for fear that you would say, okay, well then I'll put someone else in the role who could. Now, Adam, would never do that, but she was afraid of that as a new young dancer in the organization. And it's all of these things that are so fascinating that are coming to light. Are there any questions about the Nutcracker or this work so far? Because I really want to dive into another thing that we worked on this past year in the fall of 2019.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Only in passing, you showed a little bit of the Arabian dance. And I'm wondering, considering the 21st century view of the Middle East, did you tackle that also?
Absolutely. In fact, it's brilliant that you brought that up. That is exactly the thing that we've actually been talking a lot about. Now, there have been fascinating arguments about why it is not a mockery versus why the Chinese dance was a mockery. And in fact, why a number of the other dances, the little French shepherdesses or the Russian Cossacks and that sort of thing, and I've been on both ends of this debate. The Arabian dance is very sensual, but the style of dancing that it comes out of is born out of belly dancing. And at least in Willem Christensen's version. I've seen other versions where they are actually more born out of those old vaudeville type shows of representation of sort of unique, again, Orientalist concepts, what America, or actually I should say Northern Europe at that time, but for this version, because it's an American version, what America might have thought of those cultures. So yeah, we are now looking at it. What I like about Willem Christensen's version is that it becomes a carpet game of one woman being hidden behind another, almost like a shell game done with carpets. Subsequently, it becomes less about sexualizing the Arabian culture that it's representing, and more about the dance and a concept of its presentation. But it is just equally as problematic in many, many ways, and we don't have answers for it yet. But it's very interesting that you bring it up, because it is something that we've begun to address as well. Yeah. Any other questions about Nutcracker or anything that we just talked about?
I have a question.
Betty, yeah.
When the makeup, by the way, to imitate a mask was really beautiful. And I was wondering, why not just wear masks?
Well, actually, it's a very good question. One of the reasons we decided not to wear a mask is because, ironically speaking now, considering masks, they're very unwieldy to dance in. And the kind of mask that it was, they're very heavy masks that actually come right there through the nose, and they have very sort of big plumage in the back. All of the turning, the upside down cartwheels on were just made it too unwieldy. So we discussed that. It's another really good question. We discussed it, but we just felt like it was going to be much easier doing it this way. Especially
beautiful makeup.
Isn't it lovely? And we went
really
with
beautiful.
a lot of different designs. And that's Yancey, the fellow who was talking, our wig and makeup man. He came forward with design after design after design for me. And he was showing different things. And we finally decided on this one. Betty, yeah.
It reminded me of Kathakali, South Indian dance.
Interesting. Yeah.
And part of going to a Kathakali performance is actually watching the makeup being applied at the before the dancers perform.
That's fabulous. That's great. Any other thing about the Nutcracker or what we just were addressing? Yeah.
It just makes me kind of just think about what is history and what was real for a particular time, and what a country or culture may just not like about their history. So, in other words, having been to China and you can go to places in China right now where people are wearing the pointy hats, and if you look back in time, they were wearing mustaches like that. I mean, where do you draw the line in what was true and what was real, and what maybe somebody just doesn't want to see?
Right. So this is where I mentioned the Asian couple that were briefly pictured in that NPR clip that we had, Gina and Phil, and they have started a program called Final Bow to Yellowface. And it is about addressing Asian representation, particularly in classical ballet. They're both classical ballet dancers, and I've known Phil for many, many years. He actually graduated my high school a couple of years after me, a couple of decades after me, which was ironic. But he actually has worked as a consultant, and this segues perfectly into the next section that I really wanted to talk about, which is our reproduction, our recreation of 1925 work that was considered lost. It was Balanchine's very first work that he created for the Ballet Russe when he emigrated from Russia during the Russian Revolution. He traveled around Europe and then settled in France as part of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, and he created this work, Le Chant de Rossignol, or the Song of the Nightingale. Now, quickly to your point, why I brought Phil and Gina on as consultants is because they are both Chinese Americans. And his point, Phil Chen felt very strongly in all of the talking that he's doing, is that there's a different kind of outlook with Chinese Americans versus Chinese from China. Those pointed hats in China are what workers wear in the fields to keep the sun off their head, excuse me. And, but from what Phil has explained through the history of his own family and through what his experience, those were a sort of symbolic to Chinese Americans in a very different way. That in China, they would look at it and just say that's a worker's hat. But to Chinese American, it is a representation, it is sort of a mockery of, you know, and a caricature of what their culture is. You know, so it's interesting. I don't think it's necessarily the hat per se, but when you put the hat with a mustache, and by the way, a lot of times those mustaches were worn more by royalty than by a worker. So it's sort of this mix and match. I mean, as you know, either Northern Europeans would redo it or Americans would redo this concept. And then you add to that a lot of shuffling feet and bobbing heads and looking at one another in sort of very sort of mocking ways. That's the whole picture of where it is. So I don't think that necessarily just wearing a coolie hat is in any way, shape, or form a mockery. But when you put it together as the whole, I think that that's really where we want to start reevaluating how we present it, because we also don't want to lose. I mean, this is the big argument that I'm still in and that I raise questions about. We don't want to lose the history of our art as well, but we have to look at it in the context of what we're looking at. When we watch a movie like Gone with the Wind, we know that it's a great movie, but we still know that it is representing a period of time, and it's representing slavery inaccurately. And these are things, this is the lens that we have to look at it through. That's why I said early on, I don't know if in 1944 that presentation of the Nutcracker was thought of as a mockery. If anything, it was thought of as a celebration. Oh, look, now she's going to China. Oh, look, now she's going to Arabia, wherever that, you know, ultimately is. Now she's going to Russia. Now she's, you know, so now we want to look at it and say, how do we do this and still make it, still honor the art form, the history of the art, and make it palatable for a 21st century audience, not just look like a museum, because now as a live art form, we still want to present that. And that's what's really interesting about the next work that I wanted to talk about, Le Chant de Rossignol, done in 1925. It was, Balanchine was only 20 years old when he created it. It was originally an opera by Stravinsky. And Stravinsky ended up not loving the opera, and neither did Diaghilev, who ran the Ballet Russe and had also presented the opera. But they liked the music and they decided to rework it into a suite, which would become mostly a ballet. The music takes enormously from Asian themes, and it actually is the very first 12-tone piece of music. It's not completely 12-tone yet, but ushers in a 12-tone system, which is actually based on Asian music systems. So this ballet is fascinating because it presents, it's sort of the first ballet done to this sort of music system, which comes right out of a Chinese music system. It is based on a Chinese theme, although it is from an 1843 fairy tale by a Danish author, Hans Christian Andersen, who writes about ancient China. It's the Song of the Nightingale. The other thing that makes this work so great is that its sets and costumes were designed in 1925 by Henri Matisse. So the Matisse sets and costumes, the Stravinsky Asian-inspired music, in fact, his first 12-tone score, and the first full ballet created by George Balanchine for in the West, it was to me a very important work to produce, and we became the first American company to do it when we did it last year in 2019. So as I said, it was done in 1925. Balanchine decided never to bring it back personally. It was reconstructed in 1999 for its 75th anniversary. In 2000, it really came out. And for the Ballet du Monte Carlo in Monte Carlo. And it was reconstructed by two old friends of mine who I had worked with on a lot of different projects when I was with the Joffrey, both as a dancer and later as ballet master and then associate director. And Millicent Hodson and Kenneth Archer, who are dance historians, they were responsible for the reconstruction of Nijinsky's original The Rite of Spring, Le Sacre du Printemps, which the Joffrey premiered in 1987 and subsequently did a number of different reconstructions. We'd stayed in contact for many, many years. We've been friends, and I had said, I really, really want to work together on a project. We finally settled on their reconstruction and reworking of the Song of the Nightingale. And it was an interesting time for us to produce it in Salt Lake City. Last year, 2019, was the 150th anniversary of what they call the Golden Spike anniversary, which was Chinese Americans who had moved to Utah and had really built the American railroad system, which was so important. This was during even the Civil War that they had started this. And so I found it a really unusual and unique way of honoring the community was by bringing back a work that was done by Russian and French artists and composers and choreographers based on a Danish story all about Chinese themes. How was that going to play? Well, I brought together Phil and Gina as consultants, and I also brought together a whole committee from our Asian community here in Salt Lake City to just discuss it and address it. They came, they watched a rehearsal. We had a whole sit down and forum with Millicent and Kenneth and with a number of our dancers, our Asian dancers, as well as a number of our dancers of different ethnicities, just all talking about this representation. Early on, rehearsals had made some of my dancers very uncomfortable because there were these extreme sort of movements. They were told to shuffle around, their hands were flexed, they were looking at each other and bobbing their heads, and they were like, why do we have to do this exactly like this? This led to fascinating conversation with the reconstructors, Millicent and Kenneth, because Millicent is a dance historian. So as a dance historian, her main focus was on making sure that it was as accurate as possible, as it could be, to its 1925 origins. But we really talked about it, and ultimately Millicent modified some of the movements. At the same time, we also worked very closely on the makeup again. And one of the things that we hit on in the original, the makeup was done so that the entire ensemble was made up, no matter what ethnicity they were, made up to look Chinese. this again, as we talked about earlier, this whole idea that this is no different from blackface. So we talked a lot with Kenneth, who is the art historian who worked on this, and how it might play. And we ended up changing the look of the makeup to be more like the exaggerated silent movie actress and actresses and how they wore their makeup. So the makeup also, we decided, had to stop at the face. So it was very clear that there were people of a different ethnicity underneath, no matter what race they were. This was who they were. So we weren't trying to cover up that, but almost create a sort of mask-like look. And they wore very sort of heavy eye makeup in the manner of, I don't know, Clara Bow, or and sort of bee-stung lips in that manner of the 1925 silent movie stars. And this created a very different look than was originally intended, but still presented the artifice that was so important to match that Matisse set. So what I thought we would do is, actually, let's see if I can leave full screen here. So what I thought we would do is take a look at, now where's I'm having mouse problems. There we go, and it is going to come back in just a second. It doesn't like me today for some strange reason.
Didn't give it enough cheese.
Apparently.
While that's going on, I just wanted to mention something. You know, a couple weeks ago, we had our little Gilbert and Sullivan thread here. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Topsy Turvy.
Yes.
It has to, but you see, Gilbert was doing back then what you are attempting to do now, which was to make the movements Japanese as accurate as he could, and the costuming. So he was faced with this stereotype of what they thought the Japanese looked like and how they moved. And he brought in Japanese women to show his chorus and his leads how actually to move as a Japanese person would. And you may recall one of the problems with the costuming is that some of the actors, singers, objected to actually wearing the costumes that would be worn by the people who they represent. So this was going on, what, 1890? I don't remember when that opera.
140 years, 130 years, whatever. Yeah. No, exactly. It's really an interesting dilemma because, again, we want to maintain the degree of authenticity in the art, but we also want, if someone knew, what is important to me is that if someone who knew nothing about what they were seeing came in and sat down, no matter who they were, that they would have an experience that they would enjoy and not go, oh my gosh, why are they presenting, you know, a culture in that manner? Which is why I say it's so important to put everything in context, in the context of what we're seeing. Here we have, I have it now, and you'll see what is so glorious about Matisse, who Matisse himself meticulously researched all of the aspects of Chinese culture. And I'll talk a little bit as we go through it, and I might fast forward through some of it because the whole ballet is long, but let's see. So I want to double check. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to go here. This was our front cloth. So instead of a curtain, we had this. This is, again, a reproduction of the designs by Matisse. Stravinsky, 1925. The whole set looking very much as Matisse does, that sort of cutout fashion that he creates as a look. All of the makeup drawn to look very much like a mask versus just trying to make anyone look Asian per se. These costumes are really spectacular. Really wonderfully redone. These gentlemen, warriors, were designed to look like their skin was terracotta, like
Oh,
the terracotta warriors. However, and I'll talk about it, we actually got a little bit of pushback because people thought we were doing blackface. You see the hats as we've talked about, the attendants. In the initial version, the women's feet were shuffling very quickly on their heels. And this was something we decided to modify so that they would step and walk a little bit more. Like, now, I don't know if our faces are covering. On my screen, our faces are covering. The emperor's entrance, though, taken a lot of research at that time that he would never touch the ground himself. So he walked on the backs of his attendants. From what we understood, this was historically accurate. Fast forward a little bit. This whole celebration, the nightingale has been brought as a gift to the emperor. The simple little bird. By the way, incredibly difficult score to dance to. The time signatures change all the time. One of the reasons we decided that actually even modifying some of the steps was not necessarily out of keeping is because it's so much a part of the history of classical ballet anyway. Classical ballet is handed down more from person to person. There are some notation systems, and obviously now with the advent of video, we're able to learn in different ways. But it really is a handed down art form, and subsequently it's how it's danced is really very much based on the person who has taught it. You see that in the great classics like a Swan Lake or a Sleeping Beauty, so-and-so's version versus so-and-so's version. And so when Millicent was working on the steps with this, she herself had only learned these steps through photographs. There was actually really no film work of this, and through discussions with dancers who had actually danced the work in 1925. So it was a long time ago when they had actually danced the work. So even their memories, you can't completely remember what it is. So it wasn't out of keeping that some of the steps could be modified. So we determined which ones we felt were actually all right to change and which ones were very much something that we all knew for fact was something that Balanchine had done. Because the choreography itself is probably no more than 80% accurate. And Millicent herself would acknowledge that. A lot of it was her own ingenuity. My soloist Jenna, who is the nightingale in this, it's interesting. We even talked, she spoke at this panel about being a Latina woman dancing the role of a nightingale in a sort of Chinese type pageant, as we called it, this ballet. Now, another interesting piece in this ballet. Here is the entrance of the magician from Japan. I think it's fascinating. He was created as a sort of nefarious and evil character. And even in 1925, particularly, and he brings in a mechanical nightingale. Again, brilliant Matisse design. And talk about dancing in a mask. Even in 1925, in a Chinese story, the Japanese character is represented as an evil figure. Perhaps hearkening a bit to the sort of strained relations between China and Japan politically for so many years, for so many decades. I will say, this is my dancer, Tyler, and he did just a remarkable job as the mechanical nightingale, night after night, in that big mask. The mechanical nightingale breaking down and shaming the Japanese magician to the Chinese emperor. Who leaves and people don't even really look at him. Now, later on, I'm going to move forward a bit. The emperor takes ill. Sorry guys, just trying to get there. And as he is on his deathbed, the character of Death appears. Now this is a really interesting figure from 1925. It's rather fascinating that in this ballet of a Chinese story, Matisse and Balanchine would agree that the figure of Death was not Chinese per se, but actually Tibetan.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no real explanation as to why they decided to make the character Tibetan. But you can clearly see, I'm not going to pretend to know the name of the actual goddess. But she has a necklace of skulls common in and as she comes for the emperor, the little nightingale comes forward. And the nightingale sings to the emperor, protects the emperor, and subsequently banishes death. There are so many things to discuss about this choreography, not just about the Asian influences, but watching the start of choreographer George Balanchine, who became synonymous with American classical ballet and his own brand of neoclassical dance. You see the roots of so much of his choreography in this, his later choreography in this. But the little nightingale ultimately tangles death up in her own necklace of skulls. And once again, even with this makeup, we had some complaints from people who said that we were putting Alison DeBona, is this person here, putting her in blackface, when indeed we were keeping her that same sort of reddish color that you see often Tibetan deities. I will say also, I have seen photographs of this death figure from the 20s, and this was, again, very daring costuming too, on other levels, very daring for a performer. So at the very end, just to quickly end, I want you to see the emperor ends up living, and there we go. That's what I see. and they form a final tableau. There we go. It's a fascinating work. It really is one I find it so important for so many reasons. It's a peculiar work. It's a very peculiar little work. It's not necessarily the most dynamic of works, but it's really about the art. But you see the roots of so many different ballets to come as we move along. But what was interesting and why I really, aside from showing the beauty of these incredible Matisse costumes, why I really wanted to address it is because here, unlike an old war horse like the Nutcracker, which is something where a tradition that we want to see year in, year out, and how we represent that to young audiences coming in and out. This posed a very different question, which is, what do we do when we bring back a piece of history? Something that was done in 1925 and uniquely of that era. How do we present it? So we went through, as I said, not only discussions with the Asian American community here in Salt Lake City, but also throughout the theater. We did lots and lots of panels, big storyboards to discuss and address different aspects of the ballet, of the ballet's representation. Why are those warriors painted terracotta? Why is this Tibetan goddess in that sort of ruddy red that you see often, to give a sense of the history, because we felt like that was our obligation in doing it. Because again, to my earlier point, if an audience member was just to sit down and see, they would go, what the heck am I looking at right here? And why am I looking at this? And why should I appreciate that? And I think that that's ultimately the big part of what we do when we look at any kind of representation moving forward. You know, I never know if I've gotten it right. I don't know if we'll ever get it right. There will always be sort of misrepresentation in one capacity or another as we move forward. But as we move forward, if we're always take the history of our art seriously, and I take the history of my art very, very seriously, but always also remember that it is a living and breathing art form, unlike a painting, which will always be what it is. This art form can live, and it can grow, and it can develop, and it can be modified in ways that I think our 21st century audiences can appreciate, while still appreciating the history without destroying the history and the legitimacy of the past of what we do. But it's a question that we grapple with all the time. We presented this at a whole lecture and discussion as part of the Guggenheim Museum in New York's Works in Progress series and in Process series, and it went very well. And a big part of the discussion was exactly what I'm talking about here. And at the sort of cocktail party afterwards, I will tell you, I was shocked to hear this, but a woman went up to Phil Chan, the fellow I'd been talking to about, our consultant, and actually said, you know, you want to make all these changes to our art form. Why don't you just go back to where you come from? It's a hot button issue everywhere in the world. And it's a hot button issue in art too. And clearly, the fact that we would even want to consider modifying in any way, shape, or form something that wasn't even 100% clear, like that we didn't even know 100% was accurate from 1925, that we would even want to consider modifying the concepts in any way to make it more palatable for a 21st century audience, really hit a nerve with people. So it I don't have any final answers for it. What I do know is that every step we take, every time we present something, we want to honor the culture that we're presenting. We want to, at the same time as honor the history of the art that we're doing, at the same time as honor the performers who are performing it, no matter what their ethnicity is and no matter what their background is. And that is ultimately the goal. So I chose these two pieces to really address that today for you all, just because it really was about Chinese representation, both in historical art and in current art, but all around classical ballet. But it speaks to so many broad issues and topics. Does anybody have any questions or comments about what we just saw, about anything going on? Thanks.
Everybody can unmute.
Yeah.
I'd just like to make an observation if I could. You know, a lot of these issues, I've been writing about ballet for Ballet Review for 35 years. I know the ballet scene well. These are the kind of issues that blow things up. These are the kind of issues that get in the news when they go wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like, then what do you have? It's like, oh, the apology thing, and then you've got the makeup thing, and like that's usually where you hear about these stories with an artistic director in the same sentence. Okay, he said everything mucked up. And so, Adam, a couple of things. One was you really took this issue front and forward with this Guggenheim in Progress series. You made it the issue before the ballet went up. And then secondly, you had this dynamite article in the Salt Lake paper that chronicled that Guggenheim panel. And one of the things that came out of that was that you heard everybody's point of view, even the one that didn't prevail. Your view prevailed, but I knew what Millicent thought, and I knew what some of the speakers thought, and I knew what some of the audience thought. It was an extremely balanced article. So I want to applaud you for doing those things, because when the story came to you, it was a proactive story about how you were handling it and inviting people's responses. So very well done. But was that all an accident, or how did you plan that in such a way?
Well, I mean, thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. And I can't say that it was all an accident, because I knew taking on a work like this, we were going to have to address it. So I had only a few options, which was, one, just present it and not even talk about it, you know, and say, here it is, and, you know, hope you like it. And if you don't like it, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about why you should like, you know, anything. Or I could have not presented it. I could have, which is actually not, this goes into what I'm talking about now, which is I don't think we should not be looking at historic pieces of art just because they don't necessarily jibe with the type of representation that we want to see of people today. However, I think it's vital that we put it in context, that people understand the context with which we're presenting this art, seeing this art, understanding this art. When was it presented? When was it created? Where was it created? Why was it created? And why should we consider it important to look at now in the 21st century? So none of that was by mistake. I very much wanted to head on do it. There were a couple of things that I didn't realize were going to come out of it. I didn't realize quite how much of a hot button it could be. I actually will be honest, I had no inkling that people would get so heated about this concept. And the other thing that had happened, and I didn't talk about, there was a small local sort of hip hop jazz ballet dance company here in Salt Lake City that does a nutcracker they call the Nutcracker Redux. And it's a sort of hip hop version of the nutcracker, but the Chinese dance, while sort of the music has been made sort of very upbeat and such, does still have costuming with a sort of coolie hat and such. And in a promo that very Christmas time, so I guess whatever that was, December 2019, time is folding in on itself. No, 2018, excuse me, because we did this in the fall of 19. They did a promo for their show, and at a cutaway, after they were in a local mall, this group, and they did the dance, and then they had the reporter talk about it, and they said, okay, dancers, take it away as we go fade to the next thing. And at a cutaway, all of the dancers came walking towards the camera, shuffling with their feet like this, some of them even sort of making funny faces and squinting their eyes and bobbing their heads and looking at them. It became an enormous issue here for obvious reasons. It was hugely insulting, and they were called out about it. And what was fascinating at the time is I had already scheduled the presentation of Le Chant de Rossignol. And so with all of the backlash that this group had gotten for very inappropriate behavior, it only made me think harder about how important it was to really put context behind what we were doing and really put it into a position. Because I thought, well, maybe we should just cancel this. People are not going to like it. But I thought, no, we can't cancel it. We have to present it in such a way that people can appreciate it and understand it. And any modifications that we do, we're not changing the overall flow of it, changing what is, it's not like putting a mustache on the Mona Lisa. It's, we're modifying some of the more exaggerated steps, but still keeping the glory of Matisse's designs, of Balanchine's symmetry and his choreography, and obviously Stravinsky.
Being respectful.
Yeah, trying to. Samare?
Hi, I have a question. You put so much thought behind your productions. The level of historic, I don't know, research you do, your whole team does. I suspect you deserve and probably want a very intelligent audience to be able to appreciate all the effort that's gone in, not just the physical efforts, but the learning that goes behind creating this, from your artistic director to your makeup person, that your makeup person puts so much research to do the math in the correct way. You deserve a very how do you put all this stuff up on your online when people buy a ticket so they can come prepped? I mean, how does that work?
We do to some degree. I mean, thank you. That's I appreciate the comment. Yes, it is very much. It really depends on the piece of work, because sometimes I think we certainly, when we made these changes to the Nutcracker, talked about it. We had, obviously we did this show on NPR. We've done local shows. So as much education as we can. But in truth, I don't want our audiences to come to the Nutcracker feeling obligated to understand that. If they're bringing young children, I think they should be able to enjoy it. On the other hand, a work like Le Chant de Rossignol, I do want our audiences coming and understanding every aspect of the details. So that's why our whole lobby was filled with, different storyboards and photographs, of historic photographs, and discussions, and different writings that I did, and writings that Millicent and Kenneth had done, the research that they had put into it. So I really think it depends on the work. I think it depends on the nature. There are times when I want this to be seen as almost as a museum piece, and really understand that. And there are other times when I want our audiences just to have an enjoyable theater experience, and I want it to be able to play at every single level in that way too. So that's why we put that work in there, so that those people who just want to come and see pretty dancing and pretty costumes can enjoy that, and those people who really want to understand the depth and thought process behind it can get that as well. We do lectures before and pretty much every one of our performances, either I or my staff or both at the same time.
I didn't mean in terms of obligation, Mr. Sklute. I meant it would enhance my enjoyment of it. Whatever amount of money I paid for the ticket, for example, I would be able to get so much more than, oh, look, somebody jumped around and did this. It's more like, oh, look how much effort you put into entertaining me. It's almost enhances the experience. I think it's wonderful.
Which is thank you very much, and please do call me Adam. Please. Yeah, no, and that is why we do lectures for that. As I said, I wanted to play at every different level because this enhances your experience. What I'm trying to say is other people, they may not. Penelope.
You know, I've been wrestling with the question of authenticity and who gets to borrow images from other cultures and how. And one of the things that I read that makes sense that you have absolutely exemplified to a great degree is that you have honored it by taking it seriously and doing the research and the honoring of the, when you talked about the Nutcracker and the use of the coolie hats and also the Fu Manchu mustache, of those being from two different classes. So if one had done one's homework, which earlier productions might not have done because it didn't occur to them,
Right.
You would never have combined those two. But if by doing the homework, by honoring the traditions, you would know not to put them on the same dancer. But the other one was, when you mentioned the makeup of the warriors, alluding to the warriors at Xi'an, I loved that. But that depends on someone knowing about the warriors of Xi'an to get that extra. There's an extra humor actually to that, of having this reference being made within the opera. But not everybody is going to know that. So I agree with Shoma that I don't often read program notes before a performance because I want to experience it without someone telling me what I'm going to experience. But afterwards, it's wonderful to have notes like that so you understand that this wasn't blackface. And the same with the Tibetan goddess of death. I would love to know that. And I certainly didn't know that. I knew about Xi'an, but I did not know about, I think I just checked. Her name's Yama, I think.
Yama, yeah, I wasn't going to profess to know that.
No, well, that's
Yama's a male.
Yes.
Yama is male.
Right.
Yama's not a female. So it was probably a combination of Yama, the god, the death god, and Kali, the Indian goddess who wears this.
I know this from working.
I just looked up Tibetan death, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
Joseph.
May I? Yeah, Kenneth has lectured on this with us at Oxford. And no, it's Vajra Yogini. And I'll tell you, I've been biting my lip because it doesn't make any sense at all.
None.
And none. And she's a meditation deity. And I've tried to write about this ballet. And all you can say is why she is there representing death. It's like taking the Virgin Mary and going, she's death in this ballet. It doesn't make any sense at all in terms of Tibetan iconography. I don't care. One of the things, Adam, that I think that you forget to mention in explaining context is that these were, one way or another, early encounters.
Yeah, very much.
What painter cared about China at all? How did they have any way of knowing China, getting to China, experience Chinese art? These were early encounters. So I'm not offended by any of this.
Yeah, but that's the thing too. But the reason I say context is because in 1925, and actually in Europe at that time, coming through the turn of the century all the way through that period of time, the whole concept of what I guess we call chinoiserie was so stylish, and that was wanted to be seen. So it really didn't matter, again, how you put things together if you were inaccurately representing things. Accuracy was less important than the glamour of it all and the beauty of it.
To that point, I think the deity as a Tibetan deity would have been popular in China and would be part of the chinoiserie. To my mind, that's what it is. It's a decorative use of a Tibetan deity, but really misused.
Yeah, and
But
it
Adam,
was really Matisse that was more than anybody else who thought of that.
Adam, aren't there whole portions of the Brighton Pavilion that are Chinese inspired?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your Nutcracker picks up on.
Our Nutcracker, well, it's very funny that you say that, because if you looked at Act 2, we were looking at Act 2, where the Chinese dance took place, and all of the other divertissements, as we call them, the designs that we came up with my set designer for this was to really place it in a sort of pavilion, or what is it, conservatory, glassed in area. But along the backdrop, we put again this weird amalgamation. We have a Russian, with the turrets sort of building right next to a pagoda, which is next to another big building that is somewhat reminiscent of Versailles. So again, we did that on purpose to sort of play into this sort of peculiar concept of traveling from land to land to land, or being in the land of the sweets, where dances from around the world dance for this young lady. It again is its own very peculiar thing. But again, that goes back to not trying to hide the concept, or not trying to pretend like it isn't what it is, but actually really celebrate the peculiarity of it, and celebrate the mix that was just brought together because of the beauty and of the art, which is, I think, what was being celebrated in these ballets.
I agree.
Anybody, anything else?
I have one more.
I had. Oh,
okay,
go ahead, Diane. Go ahead, Diane.
And then Betty.
I just had one more question, and it's kind of an extension under my question before, and you really did answer that question very well for me.
Okay.
Going for the history and celebrating the culture in the most honorable way, as opposed to looking for an attribute to the culture that might not be maybe the nicest or the kindest way to look at the culture, even if it's true. I like the idea of looking at the most courageous attributes of the culture. That's very beautiful. I like that.
Thank you. I mean, even stereotypes are born out of a degree of reality as well. But
exactly,
the issue is, do we want to create or perpetuate stereotypes? Do we want to do a mockery of a culture versus, as I say, a celebration of a culture?
Exactly. So here's my question, though.
Oh,
which is just the kind of the reverse, and I don't know enough about it. There must be dances in China or other parts of Asia that depict Western culture, and I'm wondering if we're so sensitive about how we're depicted. For instance, there's you could call it the stereotype of the cowboy, but the cowboy is a particular way.
Oh yeah.
And I lived with them when I lived in Arizona. I mean, there's just our culture is very diverse, the American culture, and then you can go into the European culture. And as you go back in time, there's even more little characteristics of people. So, and maybe they're flattering, maybe they're not. I don't know enough about dance in China to know if there are dances like this. And I mean, do we care? I don't know. Do we care?
Joseph can answer this one.
You're making me cringe, because I was in Beijing and my friends are like, oh, I'm going to take you to this big dance show, big popular dance show. Okay, great. And it's just a big commercial, quite an amazing thing. And all these dancers, about 50 dancers come out making a V, and boom, the capes drop, and it's 50 Chinese Marilyn Monroes. Okay? it was amazing. It was really, so yeah, I think to my mind, it's the oldest artistic thing in the world. The oldest prehistoric art they found is on these implements that could travel around. And they find the exact same thing, 1,000 miles apart. Somebody copied something else they did.
Yeah.
And an artist intrigued by another something is the oldest story in the world, I think. But yeah, so yeah, Diane, I absolutely. And not just East and West, just assimilation of all kind, you know?
I always find that fascinating to see how we're depicted in dance.
Well, and just bringing it back to my own art form of classical ballet, when you look, I mean, at how Chinese and Japanese in particular focus on classical ballet, they are remarkable in how they've taken this Northern European art form and actually are able to do things both on a technical level that is far superior many times than to anything that most Western classical ballet dancers are able to achieve, and that is because of the way that they have focused on and the discipline of the art form in a very different way than Westerners do. You know.
Absolutely.
Betty?
First of all, kudos to you, Adam, for the kinds of research and things you're doing. But I wanted to say that I wish everyone was doing this. Barbara, you'll recall when we went to see Layla and Majnun by Mark Morris.
Oh my God.
And it was an abomination of Orientalist tropes, of people waving silk scarves and just doing everything that was just so pathetic. So kudos to you for getting it right and for taking the time to do the kinds of research and being sensitive to the three things you mentioned: the history, the culture, and the performer. But I also wanted to mention an experience that speaks to what Shoma was talking about having an educated audience. A number of years ago, I was in London and seeing a performance of Othello. This wasn't a dance performance, but at the moment, Othello was played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, if I'm saying his name right, I don't know. Black actor, you've all seen him in films. And at the very scene where he's coming into Desdemona's bedroom to kill her, he comes in and he's wearing a jacket that is made out of a fulkari, an Indian dowry cloth. And somebody did their homework and knew that he was wearing something that had been treasured by her and made into a jacket. And yet I probably was the only one in the audience who gasped at that moment. So other people were enjoying it. It was colorful. It was wonderful. So both things can happen. And so I'm just sort of validating what you said, that there can be the people who come and say, wow, this is an amazing performance. And there's others who can say, wow, the costume designer really did their homework.
And that's the hope. The hope is that we're always playing at all of those levels, that it can play at those multi-levels, so that no matter who's coming to the theater, you know, they get a good experience that they can enjoy.
It's a concept of Easter eggs too.
Yeah,
You know, where you see something that not everyone sees, and it's
right.
a delight. Yeah.
Hey, Adam, I have a question. What now in your work would you say you really draw on your Joffrey experiences from to do right now? Like at this point in your career where you have your own company and you're your own thing, but is there something with the Joffrey that you would say really characterizes how your company is different than other companies? What is there anything that you're still pulling from the Joffrey that defines what you do?
I think that the thing that always comes to me from my work with the Joffrey is, again, the thing I've been saying here repeatedly, which is this idea of something for everyone. You know, I think Robert Joffrey's great gift in programming was really creating a program where you could go. And in fact, he had a formula, even you can see it, where you started with something pretty, usually focusing on classical ballet technique and that sort of thing. Then he went into something complicated and moody and difficult and maybe required a lot of thinking in the next act, and then finally finished it up with a big pizzazz, razzmatazz kind of ballet that would really, brought everybody home smiling, something that like Jerry Arpino's choreography always did for the show, So I really think, to me, that's still a big portion of how I like to look at programming, is really develop that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I have a question. I think it's partly to what Diane was saying. I think Joseph and I had once spoken, reinterpretation, preserving through reinterpretation. So for one, we went to see that Giselle that was done in Chicago by that choreographer from London, Akram Khan.
Akram Khan's version, yeah.
He brought in a lot of Indian, thought it didn't make it Indianish, but the concept of the Giselles really looked, the willies really frightened the willies out of me. They weren't white outfits, they looked like that copy version.
Yeah.
And that choreographer, what's his name? Siddhi Larbi Charkawi, he does a lot of work that is so brings in a lot of the nuance and the emotion and the currentness of issues that matter. But what I'm very curious about is, what is your upcoming productions? Like, how do you select things that you're going to do? Are you going to pick ones that are very ethnically touched upon, like Bayadere or whatever the heck, ones that are very global? Or do you take American stories, to Diane's point, and expand them into a global setting? Because we live in a global world. You can take any American setting.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
It's a really good question, and I guess what I would ask is, are we addressing the fact that in light of where we are right now in the world and that everything is happening, am I reevaluating my programming, or am I reevaluating how I present my programming? And I think that I would like to say the latter a little bit more. I think that I will continue to produce new and untried work and new ways of approaching historic work, but also try and maintain the through line of the great classics. I'm actually of a minority in the artistic director forum that I mentioned that I'm on, where we're all sometimes yelling at each other, but I guess I consider myself a classicist, which is something I didn't even realize I was until I came to Ballet West, because it's certainly not the kind of history that I grew up in with the Joffrey Ballet as such, but it's so much a history of this company, and I felt it an obligation. And I think part of my need to do research, comes from the fact that I'm a child of academics, and so I grew up in a sort of I wasn't supposed to be a dancer. I was supposed to be a professor. My parents were not happy with me becoming a dancer. They support it now, but so was the idea of really delving into the research of it. Now, I don't want to lose the great history of our classics, but what I am doing is looking at the way that I would produce them moving forward. I'm not sure I would feel comfortable producing La Bayadere, for instance, in the manner that it may have been produced in the past. I am, it's everything that we were talking about now. But that said, there are new stories to be told and new things that we can be looking at in terms of how to bring classical ballet into the 21st century. And I work, 4 or 5 years out easily, looking at that as we move along. And so that will show itself. It will illuminate itself as it comes along, just like how I approached little things that I was talking about, like hair or the color of a woman's tights on stage. Those, I feel like in order to stay relevant and current in history, we have to stay current in history, so I can think about where I'm going to go, but there's a difference to me about addressing the issues of what is important and vital where we are in the world, and as an artist addressing that, and simply jumping on the bandwagon, to Barbara's point early on, of what is the proper thing to be doing at this point. And So I look at it carefully. I look at what it is, you know, I look at what we want to present that's going to make it good for new audiences and audiences that are connected to their history alike. I don't know, that's a very broad way of answering your question, but I don't think I can answer it much more than that, you know, beyond a laundry list of ballets that I want to do and ideas of where I want to go with our company.
I've had the fun of getting to talk to Adam about some of the ballets as he's bringing them back. And I remember many years ago when I was at the Sun-Times and a dance critic, the Royal was bringing back a new version of Swan Lake again. And Donald J. Hennihan, who was the dance and music critic at the, oh, what was the name of that paper? It's been gone for so long.
Daily News.
Huh?
Daily News.
Yeah, thank you. He went on to the New York Times, but in trying to make Swan Lake make sense, the headline was, there's this swan, see, you know, the whole ballet doesn't make sense from the very premise, but it's one of the great, fabulous, loved ballets. And I remember when Adam was restaging Swan Lake, the research you did was astonishing.
Well, I mean, listen, it doesn't make sense to have women dancing on their toes or being lifted upside down to tell a story either necessarily. Mm-hmm. Just like it doesn't make sense to tell a love story where you're singing a high C or above either, you know, it's not, but it is an extension. It is the, you know, extension of who we are as human beings. And that's the creativity of it. So, you know, there are all sorts of new things that we have to explore. And we also have to honor our history, because that's only by understanding, I feel like only by understanding the past can we really move forward into the future. And, you know, because the history repeats itself so much. So, you know, how do we make it relevant?
And the history is also the discipline. And what they said about Margot Fonteyn was that because her discipline was so exquisite, she could go beyond it and become the actress she was. And, you know, if you didn't have the discipline, what do you have?
Yeah. I mean, in our rehearsals, in our classes, I can break down the minutia of one step, and we'll be spending an hour on how just to, you know, move one heel forward. And, you know, why are we doing that? We're doing that so that it comes naturally, so that when the dancer goes on stage, they're not even thinking about doing that, and they can be the character or whatever they're doing in the moment, and have that ingrained in their body. That's what the discipline of any art form, any great art form, is, to understand that. That's what a painter works on, or a sculptor, what a musician works on in terms of their technique in playing their instrument, or the vocalist, you know, all of these things. It's that degree of discipline, and you work tirelessly on it so you can produce art without having to think about all of these little details. They come naturally.
Anu?
While I really agree with how the world is changing, and now so many more people are thinking about not having offensive tropes, I'm also guarded against people becoming oversensitive and looking to criticize everything that they perceive as offensive. Because I think that people are going to close themselves off to a lot of experiences, which I'm not sure it serves the best end. For instance, I've always been puzzled. I can see how it's very clear how certain things in those ballets were offensive. But now when you have non-Caucasian people dye their hair blonde or wear light-colored lenses, or, you know, people that aren't Christian. I mean, I grew up in India, and I can tell you Christmas is widely celebrated more as sort of a party thing than a religious thing. Is that also something to take as insensitive?
I think that's such a huge question that I always feel, just speaking for myself, I never really ultimately can answer that. So when I'm presenting our art, I keep on going back to what I said repeatedly, which is it's contextual. It's making people understand, because people are either going to find it offensive or not. But if we act ignorant of what is potentially offensive, then we can't address it in any way. And, you know, yes, no matter how far we go, there will be another step of it, you know. I hate the color blue. I'm offended that you're wearing a blue shirt, you know. I mean, you know what? It's exactly to your point. Where do you draw the line? Because we have people who, and that's what I love about looking at the art. Like what Joseph was saying, it makes absolutely no sense necessarily to have a Tibetan deity in an ancient Chinese, story in the same, you know, but it didn't matter because they were more excited by the beauty and the glamour of it. Just like someone says, oh, I want to put on blue contact lenses because I want blue eyes, you know, or, those things. But again, we have to, I say we look at it in context. You know, we look at a movie like Gone with the Wind in the context of what it was and when it was produced, and understand it. Because wouldn't necessarily an 18-year or 21-year-old who is feeling very, very politically and racially motivated right now to in terms of equity and whatever, not having ever seen Gone with the Wind and then be shown Gone with the Wind, couldn't they can and have blown their stack over this? You know, what is this? How, you know, this is awful. You know, so the question is, do we burn it and never see it again, or never produce it again? Or do we produce it in the context of when it was presented, with the understanding that it is deeply flawed in its representation on a lot of levels, but is also a great piece of art on a lot of other levels? So you know, there's no final answer to that. And no matter how far we go, someone else will become offended to something else. We're now at a place in the world and the culture, I think, where we are calling out a lot of things. And I think we have to go through that phase right now before we can get to a calmer dialogue about what we do with the future. But that's just my opinion on that. I think that if we don't go through this extreme phase, then we don't get to a place where we find a greater degree of balance. But I know what you're saying. There's no, you know, everybody is always going to find something.
In a very weird way of irony, I was just thinking while you were speaking, one might call Matisse prescient. To have a Tibetan deity in a Chinese opera now is very, very, very appropriate in a horrible sort of way. They might say, spot on, correct.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Penelope?
Yeah.
Just that your comment about if we ignore history, we're not doing ourselves a favor. If we change everything from the past to conform to contemporary ideals, we lose the sense of sort of how we got here. If you don't know that Gone with the Wind was perfectly acceptable to the general population in 1939, or then the book in 36, you don't understand how this culture got where it is. I just learned, to my horror, that the GI Bill basically didn't apply to African Americans. You couldn't get a mortgage, you know, because of redlining. Schools wouldn't accept you. So all the things that made it possible for GIs to advance into the middle class were basically closed. to the GIs who are African American. I didn't know that, because we tend to tell our history without telling the bad parts. We don't tell what we did wrong. We don't tell those things. And I don't know how you combine that with you need to put on a show. And that's a different job in, some ways. But I don't know how we somehow include the ugly past if it's part of that, so that people understand that, yes, we think this way now, but you know what? We didn't always. And to your point of the person who spoke at the Guggenheim about go back where you came from, not all of us believe that now.
Well, yeah. I mean, he turned to me, he told me the story, and he said, "What? I don't want to live in Berkeley, California anymore," which is where he came from. Berkeley, California, when he was told, "Go back to where you came from." Yeah, sorry, it was. Yeah.
Shari.
Oh, hi. Adam, first of all, hello, I've missed you.
I know, it's been so long. It's nice to see your face.
My favorite author is Ken Follett. Does wonderful, huge trilogies historically with an enormous amount of research. And I think that's what you've become, the Ken Follett of today's ballet world. And I mean it as a compliment. I think it's great.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. I think research is so important. Just to Penelope's point, again, yeah, I keep going back to the phrase context, is what are we looking at? If we're going to present someone in blackface on a stage, we would present it with the self-awareness and self-consciousness of what we were doing, and tell the audience, why are we putting someone on in blackface on the stage? Not just acting like, oh, a minstrel show is a minstrel show and that's fine, and, or like not addressing what is wrong with it. That's art too, is saying this is not, that this was not good. And we can do that in any art form, in any presentation, that we do, just like we have to do in history. Yeah, understanding the warts in our past are important in terms of letting us understand how we got to where we got. So I mean, that's why I keep saying context. Context is so vital. There are those, like why I said it doesn't matter to so many audience members in the specifics about what we went through for the Chinese dance and the Nutcracker, and it shouldn't have to matter. But to those audiences that are intrigued, we should give them the opportunity to understand that. Just like with a more complicated historical work like Le Chant de Rossignol, the context, it's so important to frame it in a very different way than one would do in the Nutcracker.
We're talking about Gone with the Wind, preceding that, and I'd never seen it, but I guess Birth of a Nation.
Oh yeah.
Was really ugly.
I watched it within a few months just because I thought I should, and it's as bad as everyone says. So
wow.
Watch it or not watch it, but it is.
Or I mean, now what we're talking about in terms of statues of Robert E. Lee, or the statue in Washington of Abraham Lincoln with the kneeling freed slave in front of him. And why is that one okay, but the other one isn't? And people, you have to understand the context behind them. And why they're there. Is it just glorifying a statue of Robert E. Lee in a town square, or are we recognizing the flaws in Robert E. Lee and saying this is a statue, it's still a piece of art, but we have to recognize that this is not necessarily, I mean, there are great busts of Nero, or Caligula, two horrible people in history, and that paintings representing Robespierre. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't mean that we should not have those pieces of art, in my opinion, but it does mean we really should recognize where they are. And as one in a town square saying "Yay" to Robert E. Lee, or is it a statue that we know was, you know, someone who is not good.
Yep. My kid. Love to you and love to Chris too.
Oh, thanks, Shari. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that, you know, I love
this was fabulous. I mean, I'm getting to share with beloved friends the artistry and depth of another friend. So thank you, Adam.
Absolutely. I wrote an article, a short one, in the program notes for Le Chant Rossignol. I'm happy to forward it along, Barbara, to you, and maybe you could then forward it along to everybody. It's just a short one about the entire program and the art. Joseph, I'm sure it's material that you know more than I do about, but you know, but it'll just give you also a little bit more context or sort of reiterate some of the things we talked about. So I'll have that.
I think you should write more.
Well, read it first and then decide if it's worth reading anything I write. I'm not sure about that.
You need your voice. I think your voice is important.
Thank you.
Fantastic, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing another great program.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Love you.
Bye.